Hello, everybody. Before we jump into the presentation, we're going to put a few questions up on the screen. If you could just take a minute to answer these, and we will begin shortly. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. My name is Sue Brzee. I'm the Marketing Director here at 2W Technologies and will be your moderator today. Thank you for joining us for the webinar on Epicor's Advanced Material Management. We do have a lot of material to get through today, so this webinar is going to take the better part of the allotted hour. If at any time during the presentation you have questions, please send them through the question box on your screen. There'll be an interactive Q&A at the end, and we'll try to get to all the questions then, time permitting, as we have a lot of you on with us today. For those of you who might not be familiar with 2W Technologies, we're a full-service technology firm that specializes in end-to-end solutions for the manufacturing industry. We are a certified Epicor partner, as well as a gold-level Microsoft partner, to name just a few. For more information on our products and services, you can visit us at 2wtech.com. The presenter for today is Sam Plummer, who is one of our senior Epicor consultants and our resident Epicor expert. I will now turn it over to Sam to start the presentation. Sam?
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. Thanks for joining us. As Sue put out there, we do have a lot to go over. When I first started thinking about all the things I wanted to tell you about with regard to Epicor AMM, I came up with a pretty long list, and kind of as I turned things over in my mind, I tried to boil this down to, what's most pertinent. So in light of that, I want to talk to you a little bit about what I see as a few of the key benefits and features of AMM. And this is by no means an all-encompassing list, but more what I see as some of the highlights, and especially some of the underappreciated or less than completely understood features, and ones that I think can deliver some real value for organizations, whether they're straight manufacturing or increasingly the hybrid manufacturer and distributor model that we're seeing more and more in the Epicor ERP space. Here's just a quick bullet list of what I see are some of the key features and some of the things that really aren't understood as well as they could be in Epicor AMM. First of all, the material request queue. That's available both in the Office client of the ERP, and it is also available in the MES screen for shop employees who are set up as material handlers. And again, this screen, if there's one, is really the home screen for a material handler in MES. It's really where they gather communications from different parts of the organization, whether it be manufacturing or sales or even material managers. And it's also where they process those transactions. So I believe it to be a very powerful screen. But like so many other Epicor screens, a lot of information is presented, and it can be a little bit confusing out of the gate. So, certainly I don't want us to be intimidated by that, though, because like a powerful tool, it's both a little intimidating at first, but also can do a lot for us. Second area that I believe is very underappreciated and delivers a lot of value is the Fulfillment Workbench. Now, the Fulfillment Workbench is not available in MES. It is available only in the Office client, and the Fulfillment Workbench is really the screen that allows us to evaluate our supply and demand position and to balance and allocate and reserve inventory against various demands. And we'll go into a little bit more about that here in just a few minutes. A couple of screens and functions that are available, again, both from the Office and from the MES client, are the get request and request move functions. And in some cases, these are standalone screens, which certainly they are, but they are also embedded into related transactional entry screens. For example, when we perform a PO receipt, or perhaps when we perform an inspection and we pass a quantity, that obviously is a transaction in itself. But one of the things that we may want to do is, rather than, for example, have the receiving person also perform the put away, or perhaps rather than have the inspector, after the inspection has been completed, put the parts into their stocking location, they can also request a move of those parts, which again is that handoff from one job function. In this example, the receiver or the shipping and receiving person or the inspector to a dedicated material handler. And again, I think the benefit here is that they allow greater job specialization. In other words, if your job is receiving, then you can focus on receiving. If your job correspondingly is a production employee, in other words, you're running a machine or assembling parts or whatever that particular job operation that you're assigned to do, you can focus on that and automate the communication and the offload of, let's say, a job completion transaction or a job receipt to inventory to a material handler who's the dedicated person responsible for example, taking completed manufactured parts and putting them away in their stocking location, or alternatively, transporting them directly to the shipping area so that they can be prepared for shipment to the customer in the event that we're shipping from WIP. Another area that I think is underappreciated is as Epicor begins to focus more on fulfillment and improving their distribution functionality over the generations of software, the idea of order fulfillment and order picking, and in particular, picked orders functionality, which is available with the Advanced Material Management module in the customer shipment entry screen. It can accelerate the speed and improve the accuracy of our shipping transactions. So I think those are really just a handful of the things. And like I said, there's a lot more than this, but these are some of the key ones in my view. And so as I was thinking about how can we illustrate how does AMM offer benefits to our manufacturing and distribution business, I came up with a couple of scenarios. The first scenario here is I've entitled it a parts shortage. And as by way of introduction, I've created a part called AMM-1, and it's a stocked purchased part, and it's used in two different plants or sites. This part is both sold directly to customers. It's also used as a required material in producing other parts. So in this example, we're going to see demand from 4 sources for part AMM-1. Demand from other plants, from plant transfer orders, demand from sales orders entered directly against our inventory for customer shipments. In this case, we also see forecast. So we have demand for this part from forecast. And then lastly, in this particular scenario that we're going to explore, is we have some job material requirements that call for part AMM-1. Now, as part of this scenario, I've said that basically we have some disruptions in our supply chain. Whether that be, perhaps AMM-1 is a part that we procure from overseas, and perhaps some bad weather, some shipping strikes, or some trade irregularities have slowed down or interfered with the supply of this part for us. In any case, these supply chain irregularities have resulted of a shortage within our company of AMM-1. And in this particular scenario, AMM-1 is also used to produce a part, in this case, if you've done a lot of Epicor training in the example databases, DCD 100-SP has, in this scenario, a material requirement for AMM-1. And DCD 100-SP is needed urgently. And in fact, we have a job created, and we've already started production on job 2417. So the first thing I'd like to do is just show you where we're at on job 2417, and we'll walk through that. So first thing I'd like to do is take a look at the job tracker. And there it is right there. Okay, so here's job 2417. And as you see, we have about 7 or 8 operations on this job. And at this point, we've already done the first 4 operations. They've been marked as complete. And we are now at operation sequence 50, which in this case is an assembly operation. And this is the point in the manufacturing process where we require AMM-1. And as you can see, Epicor is giving us a visual indicator that we do have a shortage of AMM-1. And right now, this is the next step in the manufacturing process. So the question for us is, what are we going to do to enable production to continue on this job, being that we have a shortage in the primary stocking location of this part? So first place we should go is to the part tracker. So here's the part tracker, and one of the things that you need to be aware is that the presence or absence of the Advanced Material Management module enables certain features within the part tracker. Now, the first piece of information, this bins tab, is kind of my favorite place to go to look and see what our status is with respect to a particular part. And in this case, the primary warehouse and bin in the main site for this part is a warehouse called the stock warehouse and a bin called stock 2. And in this case, we have 5 parts on hand there, which, and if we go back over to our job, we'll see that we actually require a quantity of 200. So obviously, we can't get 200 of this part right now from the main warehouse, the main stocking warehouse. What I do also see here is these 3 records. And in this case, we have some parts sitting in an inspection warehouse, looks like quite a few of them, and also an additional quantity of parts sitting in the receiving warehouse. Well, in this case, I'm able to see here that if I can go get these parts out of inspection, in other words, expedite the inspection process, I can get 228 parts into stock and available. Now, this is where, if you have the AMM module, you'll also see this part locations tab. And under part locations, we have both a WIP tab and an inspection tab. So in this case, since I'm interested in parts that are in the inspection warehouse, I want to see, has inspection been completed on those parts yet? And because there are no records shown here, that indicates to me that yes, all of these parts, both in receiving inspection and in the D1 bin of the inspection area, in other words, a total of 228 parts, are really sitting on hand and ready to be moved by a material handler. The inspection's been completed. They just need to be moved to their stocking location so they're available for us. Now, in this case, these parts in the receiving area and in this bin, another 185 parts, are actually sitting in receiving. They've been received. They are here in our plant on hand and just waiting to be put away. So given that, we're going to take a look at another view. And in particular, that view is the material queue manager, which is going to allow me, in this case, I'm functioning as a material planner or perhaps an expediter, and I need to get these parts into their stocking location ASAP. And the way I'm going to do that is using the material queue manager. And again, it's not my purpose here to train completely on how to use this screen, but in particular, here are all of the material queue records related to those parts that need to move from inspection to stock. And actually, it's all of them minus that one. So what I'm going to do is assign my superstar employee, employee number 106, who happens to be Wonder Woman. I'll have to find her here. So I've assigned those to Linda Carter. So again, I use the Material Queue Manager to manage those expedites and get those to the top of the list for my material handler, Linda Carter, to process. So again, I already have the material request queue open, but it can be launched here from the MES screen. And in particular, I only want to see, and we can work on different ways to assign these and use these filters. But in particular, what I want to do here is, so here are the transactions that the material manager has assigned me to move. And I can process those in turn by selecting each one and clicking the process button. And in this case, we see a lot of information. What is the part? What is the quantity? A reference to where these came from. In this case, they were a receipt from a PO from A to Z Metals. And a quantity of 5 needs to be picked up from the inspection area, bin D1, and moved to the stock warehouse. And I'll continue to process these transactions. Again, some more from another PO receipt. I'm going to get all these put away. And so now I've gotten all of my received parts into their inventory locations. And I can come back over here and take a look. And now I see that I have a total of 233 parts on hand in the stocking warehouse, which is more than enough to satisfy the requirements for my job. So one of the ways and one of the tools, additional tools that we have available to us to manage reservation and allocation and fulfillment of parts is called the Fulfillment Workbench. And so the Fulfillment Workbench is not an MES screen. It is, in fact, a office screen only. In other words, a screen that would typically be used by a material planner or an expediter. So I'm going to go ahead and search. And in this case, I just want to look at all demand for part AMM-1. And in this case, there were multiple demand records found. As we talked about earlier, we have jobs, we have customer orders, and we have a plant transfer to another part, all creating demand for this particular part. In this case, I'm looking for job 2417, assembly 0, material sequence 20. So I'm going to select that record, go to actions, reserve and release for picking from the primary warehouse. And in this case, I'm going to tell my material handler, I want these parts picked today. We do have the option to print documents, but in this case, we're doing straight electronic-based picking. So I'm not going to print the material queue report, although that certainly is an option. So back to Linda Carter here, and let's take a look and see what transactions we have out here. Oh, we didn't complete our transactions yet. Let's take a look first at the Material Queue Manager and see if perhaps this request got stopped over there. And there's the material queue that I just created for the balance of 190 required parts for this job. So I'm going to go ahead and, again, manually assign my employee. But again, this can be automated with additional setups of things like warehouse teams. So transactions can be automatically prioritized and routed, but in this example, I'm manually using the material queue manager to do that process instead. So again, back to Linda Carter's material request queue. Clear this out. And in this case, I actually prioritized the incorrect transaction. There were 185 parts still sitting in receiving to be put away. So I went ahead and processed that. So here's the 190 that need to be issued to my job so we can continue production. So I'm going to go ahead and select that material queue and process it. And notice before we were doing a stock to stock movement. So when I clicked on that material queue, the material queue screen launched the move material screen. In this case, the transaction that I'm going to perform is a issue material transaction. Now, the from, of course, is coming from the stock location where I have the parts put away. Up here, I see the job, the assembly sequence, and material sequence to which the material needs to be issued. And I'm being directed as a material handler to take these parts to the production floor and to a specific bin. In this case, the bin that is the input bin of the resource where this operation is scheduled to be performed. In this case, that input bin is called Assembly Bench 1 in. So I'm going to gather up my 190 parts, take them over to that location, and now we've performed the material issue. And just to confirm that happened, we will go back over and take a look at our job tracker, and we can refresh the view. And if we go down to operation sequence 50, there's material sequence 20. We notice that material has been issued complete, and we are ready to begin the assembly operation. So I'm going to skip ahead a few slides here, because the slides from today's presentation covered each of those detailed steps. What I want to do is recap exactly what we just did. We had a part shortage scenario. In particular, we did not have an adequate amount of AMM1 on hand in the stocking location to begin production, or at least to begin a specific operation on this priority job that we identified. We used the tools Part Tracker, Fulfillment Workbench, the Material Queue Manager, and the Material Request Queue, working in concert between the Material Planner Expediter and the Material Handler to quickly locate, reserve and allocate, and move parts to the point of use, which were held up in our internal processes. In our cases, some parts were sitting in receiving, and some parts had been inspected, but not yet returned to their stocking location. We were able to locate those and find them and use these tools to solve supply and demand issues in real time. Now, again, that was, a very quick run through of a specific scenario that I had set up, but I just want you to understand the takeaway from that there were a lot of tools in play there. And if we did not have those capabilities, we would have, number one, been late in producing that job, because maybe we would have had to physically walk around the shop looking for those parts, or walk over to receiving and ask him if he had seen them, and then he'd say, yeah, but I sent them over to inspection. Then we go flag down the inspector, find the guy that inspected them and say, hey, where are these parts at? And then he'd say, oh, they're right there on the shelf. They just are waiting somebody to put them away. And by the time we did that, we may have wasted hours and if not days in doing that. And so the first problem we would have had is that wasted time and effort and the delay in production. And what I see as being the more serious problem is many companies, when they experience shortages like this, their first reaction is just to buy more parts, which in turn creates two other problems for us. One, higher inventory with lower turns and increased amount of cash tied up in inventory that we really don't need. And then secondly, and this can be a very real problem too, is we're physically clogging up our plant with parts we don't need. So not only the cost of those parts, having those parts on hand, but occupying the space in our plant that we really don't need. And this was a prime example of something that if we weren't using a tool like AMM and the real-time ability to capture and expedite transactions, our way to fix this problem and keep it from happening next time may have just been to buy more parts. And it's really not the right answer. Okay, so given that, I've created a second scenario because I think this is also a powerful scenario. And again, it's somewhat related to the first one, but in this case, we're going to focus exclusively on how we use tools to manage order fulfillment. And in particular, we're going to use a tool that we just used, the Fulfillment Workbench, to evaluate our ability to fulfill some sales orders for part AMM1. And we're also going to use a feature that is enabled within the customer shipment entry called picked orders. So by virtue of using Epicor's order picking process in advanced material management, we're also able to improve the speed and accuracy of our customer shipment entry process. So first place we want to go is, again, back to the Fulfillment Workbench and take a look at where we're at with this part now. So it looks like I have a little bit of stale data here, so I'm going to go ahead and clear this out. In particular, I'm going to focus on order fulfillment. And in fact, and this screen in and of itself is extremely powerful. And I'm not going to even attempt to touch on the features here, other than just to say, I only want to look at demand for my part in question, which is AMM1. So in this case, I have 4 different elements of sales order demand for this part. I have one order with a single open release, and I have one other order with 3 releases over the next several months for this part. So I'm just going to select all of those. And now in this case, I want to see what is my availability of inventory to fill this order. So I'm going to click this button, the Refresh Fulfillment button, and it turns out that now I have sufficient inventory to fill all of these orders complete. And in this case, perhaps I'm going to decide, depending on what my policy is, do I want to fulfill all or just 1 or 2 of these releases for this particular customer. I notice there's quite a bit of additional information available here to include shipping methods, the ship to location, if I maintain physical dimensions, for example, on my parts, length, width, volume, net or gross weight. I can use the Fulfillment Workbench to actually plan my shipments to, for example, if I'm trying to build a truckload shipment to a customer, I can use the Fulfillment Workbench along with those attributes of the parts to determine how exactly I want to build that shipment before I even allocate the inventory. Now, in this example, I'm just going to go ahead and select each of these releases, and then I'm going to reserve and release for picking against the primary warehouse. In this case, I get a message saying 4 demand records have been selected for picking, and there were no picking errors. And then we can determine when do I want to have my material handlers begin picking these. In this case, I'm going to say a specific date, and again, I'm just going to tell my material handler I want to pick them today. Again, we have the opportunity to include paper-based documents. This time, we're going to go ahead and take a look at this material queue report, because I do have customers who like to be able to hand their order pickers a document, a piece of paper to pick from, instead of having them use the material queue. Again, lots of choices available to us here. So I'm going to go ahead and print the default report. I did check the print barcode, and we're going to print preview this report and take a quick look at it. And there it is. Now, a little bit about what we see here. Again, the key elements of these material queue records for picking are how many and what part, when do I need to do it. In this case, since these are for order, who is the customer I'm picking for, and also the from and the to locations. Now, you might be wondering, what is it that's represented over here in this barcode? This is actually the material queue sequence. In other words, it's a unique record that is created for each material queue entry. And in fact, there is a screen called Process by ID, which we can use. So for example, we could scan this barcode, and with a single scan of the material queue sequence, we can use the Process by ID functionality to enter that transaction. Now the problem is, and one of my problems, I guess, with Epicor standard reports in general is they're never quite complete, and it would be awful nice to have a human readable version of that material queue sequence, since I don't actually have a barcode reader. Well, anyway, once we've done that, we have the choice of either using the paper-based workflow, using the material queue report, or again, we can use the material request queue in MES to process those transactions. I just want to point out where that Process by ID, the screen looks like this, and this would be entered by scanning the barcode. And then once I did that, it would populate the Process by ID screen with part number and quantity and unit of measure, etc. And of course, the from and to locations. I'm just going to use the material queue, process these instead. And it looks like I better go back to my material queue manager and get these assigned, since I haven't set up any rules. And let's see, let's take a look at our, again, there's those sequence IDs, and looks like these are our sales order pick transactions, the last 4 here. I'm going to go ahead and assign those. So again, going to process these transactions, and these are just inventory move transactions, moving from the stock location to the shipping area. I'm going to go ahead and do all my pick transactions, walking around the warehouse, gathering parts, moving them over to the shipping area to pick the shipment. And again, now as a material handler, I'm done with those transactions. And the next step in the process is customer shipment entry. And again, this screen should look familiar to all of you. It's the standard Epicor customer shipment entry screen. However, if we have the Advanced Material Management module, we gain the ability to use picked order functionality. And in this case, here's a list of those 4 pick transactions that I just did. So if I want to, I can go ahead and notice that when I select the first pick for order 5377, we automatically selected the other 2 picks for this sales order. In other words, we want to combine them all on the same shipment. If I deselect those and only choose the one pick transaction for Dalton's order and create the pack, I'm only going to get a single line pack slip. So I'll go ahead, print my pack slip, do whatever my process is, but that is shipped. I can go back to my picked order functionality, select the other 3, create my pack. Of course, this time I get a 3-line pack slip. And once I've completed my shipping process, I can go ahead and mark that as shipped, and parts are on their way to the customer. All right, so back to our scenario and a quick recap of what we did. Using the order fulfillment functionality of Fulfillment Workbench, material queue processing, and customer shipment entry picked orders, we're able to ensure that sales order demand is fulfilled according to deliberate decisions that we made in the Fulfillment Workbench. Again, the Fulfillment Workbench is the point at which we determine which demand is going to be matched by supply and in what priority we are going to execute those transactions. As we saw here, these tools enable real-time communication between sales order entry, between inventory and fulfillment, and shipping, all to be seamlessly and in real time integrated through MES screens. And the result is a prioritized and automated fulfillment process. So at this point, that concludes the demo. And I would like to pass the mic back to Sue so that perhaps we can do a little bit of Q&A. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right, thank you, Sam, for that presentation. As we move into the Q&A session, just a reminder, if you haven't submitted your question yet, you can still do so using the question box that appears on your screen. Okay, Sam, here we go. First question. Is there a way to mass delete old material request transactions in the material request queue?
Good question. The only screen where I know that, and I realize this is a problem because in many cases, and I'm guessing most of those are whip movements, the only place in Epicor in which that I know off the top of my head at least, that we can get rid of a material queue transaction without processing it is in the material request queue screen. We can select and delete. Now, if we had a large number of material queue records to delete, probably the best way to do that, I don't believe that the material queue is accessible via the DMT. but that's certainly worth a look. You can see if there's a DMT template available that allows you to interact with material queue records. And if it is, you could obviously write a BAQ to select all those records and use the DMT to delete them. If you can't do that, probably, and I'm just guessing, you may have thousands or tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of material queue transactions to get rid of. Option B would be to build a Service Connect workflow to do that. Obviously, same idea. You write a BAQ, select the records, and then, figure out which business object and method is being called by the material queue process screen and delete them that way. Those are two ways I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay, great, thanks. Next question. How do you handle jobs connected to orders?
In the case of direct shipments from WIP, remember and we didn't demo this, but in the end activity screen or the report quantity screen of MES, obviously the key flag to be set by that transaction, by the transactions in manufacturing. In other words, the completion of a quantity against the last operation on the job, that, as I mentioned before, that request move checkbox is available there. And in that case, if we were to look at our job, let's see if we can see how that might work in a quick example here. There's our job tracker. So the final operation on this job is an operation called shipping. Now, I didn't design this, but in this case, when we report any quantity complete against this operation, we may decide to request a move. And in that move request, Epicor is going to understand that in the case of a make-to-order job, the next stop for these parts after they have passed this operation would be to take them to the shipping department and prepare them for shipment. So now, one thing I will say, most of my customers who do a lot of work with advanced material management have deliberately decided to minimize or eliminate make direct type jobs. In other words, make to order type jobs. And they run all, as in 100% of their manufactured parts through inventory. And those are generally done in MRP type environments as well. In other words, they make everything to stock and they ship everything from stock. But again, that can be a little bit more involved if you have a mix of make direct and make to stock jobs.
Okay, next question. In the Fulfillment Workbench, there are a couple fields that would be helpful, such as fulfillment priority, do not ship before, and do not ship after would be helpful. How do you get those populated?
I don't know specifically about those fields, but I do know that most of the data grids in Epicor, the underlying data object behind those contains many, many, many more fields than what are shown by default. So, for example, we'll take a quick look without kind of getting mired in the details. Hopefully my user has personalization abilities, but if I use my personalization tools and select a particular data grid that I'm interested in, I can go here to the collection and notice there are quite a number of hidden fields. And if I can find the field that I need here, for example, make direct is one, I can simply clear the checkbox and now that field will be displayed in the grid. I'm not sure if the particular ones that you want are available in the underlying data object. If they're not available in the underlying data object, then a pretty significant customization of the screen is involved.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Sam, we've got a lot of questions still coming in, so thank you everyone for bearing with us. One question that's been asked a few times, I guess, in a few different ways is there a set price for this module? And is that something 2W has experience working with?
Price is dependent on your license. So that's definitely a it must be quoted question in terms of purchasing the license for the module. Implementing the module, again, is highly dependent on the number of transactions you want to use it for, the number of processes. In other words, it's almost impossible to say any sort of even fixed price to implement without knowing what you want to do. And did I answer all parts of that question?
Yeah, I think the other part was, can 2W Tech help them with that?
Oh, yeah. Well, I hope I've shown you enough here to establish at least a little bit of credibility that, yes, we have worked quite a lot with advanced material management and many attributes of it, whether it's order fulfillment, whether it's job material reservation and allocation, or any other problems that you wish to solve with it. But really, the answers to those questions start with a dialogue about, you know, what are the problems you're looking to solve, and, you know, then we can go from there. Because, you know, honestly, this isn't a cure-all. It can't fix everything, and there may be other process issues that are going to deliver more bang for the buck. And, you know, a great example of an area that a lot of companies can do a better job at, I believe, is receipt entry. And obviously, in the case of a part like AMM1, you know, our scarce purchased part, if we can do receiving more accurately, that's the first step in the process. And if we have a broken receiving process, AMM is not going to help us with that. So, and that's just an example. So really, you know, it's such a big area that it really begins with a discussion about what's the problem we're looking to solve.
Yeah, and I would say, just to add to that, so if anyone really is interested in knowing what this would cost you, just shoot us a quick email, and we can just have a discussion about your number of users and kind of get you a ballpark figure for that. Okay, so moving on. Next question, Sam. Is there a way to manage entire jobs? We pick all of the parts for a job and want to stage the job in a location while it waits for assembly to run the job. How can we identify the location or move requests for a job?
Well, again, the answer there is in Fulfillment Workbench. Now, Job 2417 doesn't have a whole lot of material requirements. And in fact, this job has only one, there were a total of 3 material requirements on this job when it started. And in this case, there's only 1 remaining open. So in this case, you know, we need some more AMM1. It's also material sequence 30. But just using that screen right there, if we put in a job number, if, you know, you might have a job number that has 10,000 open material requirements on it. If it's an extremely complex job with many, many sub-assemblies, you could use this same screen to evaluate your inventory position with respect to fulfilling that job, and then direct your pickers to begin pulling material.
Okay. Is there a way to mass delete old material request transactions in the material request queue?
We actually asked that question, and I think answered it before, and no, there's no menu option that I know of. Now, depending on what type those are. For example, if we'd already created, and the key here is transaction type. If Those material queue records are WIP to WIP movements. In other words, I finished a part on operation sequence 10 and I requested a move to operation sequence 20. There is no way that I know of to delete those other than through the material request queue screen. But again, possible ways to access that, perhaps through the DMT. If not through the DMT, then it would be a pretty straightforward exercise to build a Service Connect workflow that could go through and delete those based on a BAQ, for example.
Okay, next question. Can you explain how one would use allocation and/or reserve?
Briefly, reservation we can set up the system to automatically reserve inventory, for example, at sales order entry or at a certain point in a job's life, like perhaps when the job is engineered or scheduled. And then through the use of Fulfillment Workbench, we could replace that reservation with an allocation. So generally, we can reserve first and then replace a reservation with an allocation, or we can jump right to allocation. I also sometimes explain it this way. A reservation is soft and can be overridden. An allocation is hard and it's more difficult and more restrictive to override. In other words, once we allocate supply against specific demand, we have to deliberately deallocate that against that demand before we'll make it available to either reserve or allocate against other demand.
Okay, and I think there's one last question maybe you haven't spoken to yet, and I apologize if you did. How to handle jobs connected to orders?
We talked about that. I think we talked about that in a little bit earlier question. Again, while it's possible to use AMM to help us automate the shipping process from make direct or ship from WIP jobs, I do have other customers who, when they looked at this, have really consciously made the decision that they didn't want to have two shipping processes. They wanted to have one. And that's what drove them to reduce or eliminate make direct and ship from WIP scenarios and run everything through inventory.
Okay, so I think that was all of the questions. If you asked a question and I didn't ask Sam it, or if you didn't get complete clarification, Sam, do you want to put your contact information back up on the screen for everybody? You can shoot Sam an email or give him a call, or you can reply to any of the webinar emails with my information, and we'll do the best we can to get back to you with any questions that we maybe didn't answer that you still have. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this up now. I know we're pushing the hour already. So thank you, everybody, for bearing with us. We will be in touch with our next upcoming webinar. So thank you again, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.